Welcome to Disarming Leviathan, a podcast designed to equip you to missionally engage American Christian nationalists. For more info on today's guest and our suite of resources, visit disarmingleviathan.com.
Vince, you have done a lot of thinking about faith and politics. What's your vocation and how do you see faith and politics in practice today?
Vince Bacote, in year 26 at Wheaton College, which means I'm past the quarter century mark.
Congratulations.
I teach theology. I'm a professor of theology and director of Center for Applied Christian Ethics. Married with 2 adult children who are Wheaton alumni. And my elevator speech about what I do is that I help build bridges between faith and life, or that I'm really a theologian and ethicist, which means that what Christians believe has to orient how we live. Which, at one level, if we think about our faith and being Christians, with Christ being that, the center of our identity, the one who saves us, etc. When it comes to Jesus, we can say both. We need to answer the question, who do you say I am about Jesus? So the what about Jesus, the information. But Jesus also says, follow me, which means that there are things that he does, and he wants us to orient our lives so that we're going around, and as we walk around, that we are reflecting him, and that we're showing that we're growing into greater proximity, to a greater approximation of who Christ is. Because Christ being the ultimate image of God, God created humans in the image of God, then how do we live more like those people? If we're living like those people, then we are people who are going to be participating in God's world, hopefully with wisdom and seriousness, but also wisdom and seriousness without confusing our participation in the world with establishing God's kingdom. Rather, we are people who are citizens of God's kingdom, waiting for Jesus to fully establish it. And in the meantime, what we are doing politically, culturally, etc., is we are trying to, I like to say, gesture toward the kingdom that is coming through the ways that we are living our lives. And so when it comes to thinking about politics, we're really thinking, if we are these people who belong to God, citizens of this kingdom, how are we showing that, one, that is our first priority, and how that first priority is orienting us to be people who have, if you will, a kingdom disposition that leads us to seek the good for others. If you're seeking that good for others in a world where it's possible for people to run for office, then that means that politics, for example, is one of the ways that people can be seeking the good for others. And seeking that good for others isn't only seeking good for people like ourselves, but for people in general as fellow image bearers. That sort of orientation is the way that I tend to think about this.
You're advocating for Christians to be engaged in civic life, in the common life that we have together.
Yes.
And part of how we manage that common life together, as you say in your book, Political Disciple, is what we call politics and government. Help, maybe for those of us who have not thought too much about this, help us think through how government and politics can be a space or place in which we can practice neighbor love.
First, I would say that politics would exist even if there were no fall. And the reason I think this is important is because part of the human vocation, going back to Genesis 1, is a human vocation where we are those who have been given this responsibility for caring for the entirety of God's world. This is echoed in Psalm 8. There's this amazement in Psalm 8 that we get to do this. And so even though we're doing it now with the complications of the fall, that stewardship of the world remains. That stewardship would include political life, because if you had a population that emerged from the first parents Then eventually you have families who, yes, are doing their own things, but at some point they might decide to do things like have trade agreements with each other. They might have things like deciding that instead of each of us taking our own way towards hunting and gathering or towards fishing, that we're going to build a road together. There might be ways that we decide that we're going to give certain responsibilities for people to be the ones who manage these different kinds of public projects. And we might be thinking about, if we care about our children in certain ways, how do we together find ways to create an environment that's great for our children? And so all of that, I think, is part of, for us, ways of being politically engaged that would happen whether or not there's a fall. The fall introduces the need for having guardrails, the need for having justice in place to create at least inertia, at least dissuasion against ways that people would antagonize other human beings, because after the fall, humans become very good at seeing other human beings as some kind of other who is not like me and needs to be either kept in their place or eliminated. And so people have been doing this in ways from the local to the international, from within families all the way to ways that these things that we call nation states, that the way that they engage each other. So we need some kind of, if you will, systems of jurisprudence and policing so that we're able to, keep the public in relative safety and kind of keep, the kettle from boiling over, you might say. And so that's part of what we need post fall. And so to be involved in politics in terms of the actual practice of it, in terms of making policy, et cetera, there are different ways that happens, obviously, but we generally give other people those responsibilities in our system because we elect those people. But we express to them our interests, and hopefully they, working together with others in politics, create public policies around all kinds of things. And so the goal of all this, of course, is that we have a life together as human beings where we are hopefully trying to have the conditions or relative conditions for being able to have, a flourishing existence, which means attending to the things that are antagonizing that flourishing, as well as perhaps trying to imagine ways for us to even create better contexts for that flourishing. So some of that can happen just by doing the entrepreneurial thing or some other kind of cultural formation, but certainly political life is also a part of that.
At the local level, for me, my imagination, I could see how that plays out, right? Like serving as the dog catcher for your community, making sure these streets are safe from the dogs.
Yeah.
That makes some sense. Maybe at the county level, I can see it. I have some difficulty though with like federal level. There just seems to be so much power and also like cajoling and manipulating and how the sausage gets made in politics is really seems to be a lot of immoral stuff going on. So how do you envision a Christian entering into that type of space where those like the other players who are also operating and managing this common life together are not cultivating a Christ-like environment?
Sure. Well, no one should be surprised, even in the church, that people don't always act like the environment is Christ-like. So why one would expect that in the political realm, or why they're expecting that in the context of business or medicine, et cetera. Don't be surprised that people show you that they're prideful, that they want power, that they're arrogant, that they might undercut people, all those types of things. But what we also see in those situations is that positive things emerge that actually benefit the good of other people. How do those things happen? How do we do that, right? So to me, that is a really important thing for us to say, hey, if there's a person that seems like the person, I mean, they like public policy. They want to be a public servant. Other people seem to like them as a potential public servant. Maybe they want to run for state representative, not in terms of state government, but as in like the U.S. representative, or they want to run for Senate. There are people that are people of genuine integrity and quality who are in politics. They're not all on the take, so to speak. They're not all just trying to think about how many connections and how much money can I get to create my own sort of universe here. So the fact of temptations and pitfalls is not unique to politics. We see it in certain ways because there's ways in which it comes to our attention and we're surprised. To which I think, are you surprised that when people do things for other motives in business when they do that? Are you surprised if some hospitals are better than others because of how they take care of people and how they even manage themselves together? And on it goes. It's not unique to politics to have to deal with the complications of humans. It's really actually unsurprising that we have to deal with the complications of humans. Because one of the questions is, what expectations do I have when I get there? Do I think just because I want to go there and to be a genuine public servant, that means, of course, everybody else is thinking that way? If I really take what I believe about sin seriously, I should never be surprised that people show me that sin is real, and that they are sometimes taking a swan dive into some of these things, because what matters to them are these other things, and public service, yeah, it's okay, but the other things about power, prestige, possessions, those things are more important to them. We have to be, but that's also reasons why some Christians should not run for politics. Why? Because that's their kryptonite, that's their heroin, and so they should not be doing it. Whereas other people, they're just not. It just doesn't vibe with them, and so they're like, hey, I just want to like make our neighborhoods better.
Yeah.
I want to make our state better. I like to solve big problems, and maybe they've always been this kind of solving big problems person, right? And because they're always this solving big problems person, then they want to be people that say, you know what, I will be a person who could maybe do something like that, except it's as a senator, as opposed to as just what I do for relatives. And maybe it's because other people are saying, I think you could really do something about this. And you keep looking at those things and talking about them and saying, what if about those things? And so I think some people can really be in those places. The problem is that we have to make sure that however we are thinking about political engagement, that we don't confuse political engagement with the establishing of the way that things are going to be for all time. I think I prefer to recommend that people look about politics as an experimental enterprise. And in this experimental enterprise, you're trying these things out. You're making these proposals. But because you're trying those things out, you're aware that it might work okay, but something else better might come along later. But at least I want to try to make it better in the moment. And so to me, I think that's part of the way to look at this. And I get it that people can be very turned off by what some people do in politics. But the thing I would say to them is, so are you telling me that there's nobody who's ever turned you off in other domains, like the way that people do those things, but it's in politics? And my wager would be, well, probably that's not necessarily true. There are other ways that you see people who are operating, if you will, in other domains where they are clearly having other motives than ones of public service.
Yeah. So we see that, like every other part of life, there's sin and evil inside of systems and cultures, things like that. When we think about Christians engaging in government, there's a big conversation now about how Christians should do that. So one of the arguments is kind of like a modern American Christian nationalism is saying that all Christians should unify and take power to establish our way of being and advance our cause. What's an alternative to that is Christians shouldn't touch government. So you see a lot of folks kind of maybe a little bit of an Anabaptist type, like, we're just not going to touch it.
Right.
Help us discern how what you're inviting us into is not the domineering domination approach?
Sure. Well, first of all, the problem with even proposing that approach, it assumes that all those people are going to play well together, because I'm not sure that they will.
Okay.
Because I mean, they may have their ideas, but you know, it's kind of like I mean, a Christian utopian society hasn't worked out as well as even your sort of hippie utopian society. At some point, hey, we have all these commitments together, etc. Then somebody decides, I want a little bit more for myself, and that happens everywhere. And again, it shouldn't surprise us, because my theology of sanctification is not that humans can reach this entire sanctification like some Wesleyans believe. So they're going to show us ways in which they still need to be sanctified. We shouldn't be surprised about that. And so what I would say is, part of the problem with saying out, in my view, is that, one, you're in a very unique situation in the modern West and in this time in history, because most people haven't had these opportunities. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, it's good that you want to make sure that your loyalties are in order, and that you want to be a proper patriot who cares for the land where you are, loves the land where you are, but you dare not worship it because you worship God alone. That love for God alone need not mean that you should stay out of the structures of society. Doesn't mean everybody should participate in them by being particular actors in the political realm, but there should be discernment about, well, maybe who should that among our people. When it comes to that, the problem of saying let's try to consolidate power, etc., first of all, is we are way too pluralistic in the United States for that to happen. Because even the conservative Christians have different ideas about this. They're not the same. A Catholic integralist is not going to say, let me just say I'll have a dose of that integralism along with a certain kind of Protestant postmillennial eschatology. This is just not going down. I do not see these people saying, guess what? Let's all do it together. And I'll have a little bit and you'll have a little bit. This is not, when I read about Roman Catholic integralism, I don't see saying, and we're very excited to have the Protestants, actually be kind of 50-50 with us. Right. It does not look like 50-50. And of course, for a lot of the Protestants, they're not so interested in being 50-50 with the Catholics either. And so there's already the problem that some of the people who have these ideas, they're not going to really be including even all the Christians. They're really including certain kinds of Christians. And then there's this factor that I think is problematic. I don't know that you have, when people are doing this, that you have all these people that if they were in power, that they're actually going to be good at doing it, good at managing public life. Just having a Christian in place does not mean that that person has political competence.
That's good.
Some people might, but even those people, I mean, do you want those people to, well, I'll put it this way. If you have those people, have you also formed their character as well as helping them to direct their political savvy in wise ways? Because how do you help that person to not be intoxicated by their gifts? And to have people around them to say, that's stupid, that's crazy, you need to step back. Because in all kinds of situations, it's easy for people to get in this kind of, hey, it's my time, it's my world type of mindset. And so I think even if people are talking about banding together, okay, how are you actually going to carry things out? And again, could you really, if you're trying to consolidate this power, I mean, you really think you're going to have an entire Congress full of people that are all just like you? And with the way the nature of the United States is, there are too many people that I think have a suspicion of what they perceive to be forms of Christian triumphalism, that it could go well. I think the conflict would be too great. You would have to, and by the way, I would say if people are talking about having consolidating Christian power ideals, etc. So, are you going to have a Christian police state? Is that what you're doing? Because I mean, how are you stewing that power? How is that going to work out in terms of the doing of public policy, the implementing of public policy? Just having Christians there doesn't make stuff just happen. I mean, you do have to make the sausage, so to speak.
Well, you have to govern.
And of course, I sometimes tell people, if you really want to see politics in action, turn on a C-SPAN sometimes, and you will see that it's quite procedural and very unsexy, shall we say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that's how a lot of politics works out. And so, but we need people who can do that, who are involved in that very procedural reality, in order for us to get better laws and policy.
Yeah, that's good.
But I don't think that the way for us to do that in a pluralistic society, I mean, pluralistically Christian, much less other things, we have to be thinking about, how do I work well with people who are not just like me?
Yeah.
And how do I make sure that I am in a place where I can have a persuasive voice? And how do I find ways to make common cause with people to get to penultimate ends? Because we cannot get to ultimate ends because we don't see clearly enough. Our vision's too dim.
That's good. So thinking about that and thinking about issues and what we advocate for, and when we do act and advocate, how do we discern like our conviction on issues? I mean, a lot of us are wrestling with which issues should I advocate for? Which ones are more important than others? When I call my senator, what should I call them about? How does our faith guide us? And in the history of the church in America, there's been seasons where the church has stood for things that are sometimes really powerful and really, in my opinion, in alignment with Scripture. And then other times where local churches or groups of churches have stood to preserve institutions that are really harmful. So how can we navigate? How can we learn from those who've come before us to discern, how to live politically today?
I think the first thing is to make sure that we're actually willing to learn from those who came before us, which means we have to be aware of things that have gone well and things that have not gone well. Being aware of the fact when people were unwilling to acknowledge their blind spots, and to develop a cultivation to recognize that I need to have enough curiosity and engagement with others that somebody can help me to see if I have a blind spot about certain things. And maybe if I'm advocating for something or a way of addressing something, that when I do it, I may be completely forgetting about people that I say I care about. But I have a skewed perspective because I'm only focusing on this one thing and everything else went out of focus. So there has to be a willingness to learn from history. The second thing I would say is it's important to recognize that there's always more issues than any one person can deal with. Most issues are more than any one person can deal with. And so however we're thinking about writing to our local chapters and our local politics or our national politics, we need to think about, all right, if society is going to be a little bit better, what are some of the things that will help it be a little bit better? Which is why, and people can debate the particulars, but you have to think about education. How am I going to help people to learn, discern, work with ideas, work with other people, know how to count? Because somebody's making the budget in terms of political context. And so am I thinking about that? Am I thinking about life and death? And how broadly am I thinking about life and death? Am I thinking about hunger as much as I'm thinking about abortion? Am I thinking about ways that substance abuse can be very detrimental to people, and how do we navigate that in view of ways that people have tried to manage issues with substance abuse, and you know, too permissive, you know, failing to be restrictive. How are you finding ways to address very real problems?
Hmm.
And of course, obviously, your questions around things like abortion. How am I talking about both unborn children and the mothers that are carrying them?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have to talk about both of those people. To me, it's very hard for a Christian cannot say I care about the unborn child, and I want to discard the mom because I think she's morally degenerate
Mm.
or whatever. And so, can I just get her off the stage, and then I gotta have this baby? Well, this is the woman who's carrying this baby.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we not participate in that cleaving of baby from mom?
Mm-hmm.
How do we actually address them both in those circumstances, as well as addressing the situations about what about the men that are involved? What about situations where people want to use contraception as a form of birth control, all those types of things. We need to talk about how to address that. We need to talk about if we're really a country that says we want people to really be equal and for there to be a kind of meritocracy. Okay, how are we going to equip people who can actually do the things that get the merit?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't care about education, you are just creating this idea. You think that people will just do it. Well, no, people have to learn how to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
They have to learn how to, if we talk about equal opportunity, they have to learn what an equal opportunity is when they see one, and then learn how to use one when they have it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're using rhetoric while failing to acknowledge that not everybody even knows what to do with what is supposedly hiding in plain sight.
Hmm.
And so how is there the equipping for that, the conditions for that, so that people will be able to step into those things and then get after it, so to speak. Am I how am I learning to do those things? And if I'm doing those things, I mean, in the midst of that, obviously I have to deal with things like, all right, we have a country that's in the modern West. Because in the modern West, the ways that differences worked out between peoples has included racialization. How do we navigate that? And how do we navigate that, recognizing that it's actually massively complex
Hmm.
because of multiple experiences that people have? Some people have a lot of things that are really like a lot of trauma. Some people, they may seem like they're like, nothing's ever really happened to me. Well, they're both legitimate experiences. You can't say that because somebody said nothing ever happened to them, that thus nothing ever happened to anybody. And you can't say because somebody's really been through it, that of course everybody has to have been through it because they've been through it. Yet you have to deal with that whole range of things, which means you've got to deal with the complexity of all those things. We have with this race, gender, etc. So we have to be people, I think, that are willing to say, when it comes to caring about the world and the people in the world and the good of people in the world, the possibilities for people in the world, how is my context and my community and my circle of influences, how is that helping me to discern what are the places for me to best invest my energy while encouraging others to invest their energy perhaps in other places, rather than creating a kind of competition about which issue is like the most Christian issue. And so I think that's a way that I would want to encourage people to try to go about that, while also recognizing that nobody can deal with all the issues, or even most of the issues. So that then becomes a question of how, at least for the Christian, are they discerning God orienting them more towards certain things than others?
Mm. Yeah, recognizing that we all are invited into a calling.
Yes.
And that calling may be an acute set of issues.
Yes.
Trying to be an expert on everything means you're an expert on nothing.
Right.
And trying to work towards everything will just, it's hubris to think we can do that.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
we're
Genesis 3
limited beings.
makes us reach for the stars.
That's right.
to reach for being deities ourselves.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
if I just grab that fruit, hey, you thought I was something before I took a bite. Watch me. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
right. That's a good point. Yeah,
that's that's the original temptation. Is like, oh, you think about reaching for the stars.
yeah.
I reach for the universe. I mean, that's kind of
You reach for the moon, I reach for the cosmos.
exactly.
Well, you mentioned our history, issues of race, and even thinking about the church. I know you're working on a documentary. Would you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. There's a documentary I've co-created called Black Plus Evangelical. People can go to blackevangelicals.com and you can watch it there. They can also invite me to come out for doing screenings. Like as we're recording this, I just got back from some screenings in LA, and there's more ahead of me this week and the next week. And it's about navigating the tension that a lot of African Americans have inhabited in the worlds of institutional evangelicalism. And so it's a 94-minute documentary. The idea started back in 2008. It was really supposed to be one interview. It turned into 24 interviews. It wasn't supposed to be a documentary. It was just going to be kind of archival, cataloging things so that people had the information for research purposes, because there's not a lot written about Black evangelicals. And now it's a movie. So
You know how that goes.
and I'm the narrator, and I'm very thankful that it's been very, very positively received. In the documentary, part of what we're dealing with is, if you're going to tell the history of the church, then who are you talking about in the history of the church? If you're talking about Black church, who are you talking about? And Black evangelicals have not gotten a lot of airplay, so to speak. And so that's part of what we're doing. There's so much we didn't do. People are asking me about, hey, or I'm not sure how much they're asking as trying to be making like suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so when you make the next one, they say, as if I was thinking about making a documentary in the first place, which I wasn't, but now we have one. And but I'm not against it. It's a possibility. But the experiences that we are talking about here is part of the church's larger story, part of the evangelical movement's larger story. And it's important to talk about these people, talk about some of the things, like where it came from, what have been some challenges, some important moments, what have been some opportunities that seemed like things were going to go certain ways, and then it kind of got dark instead. And certainly, it's an opportunity telling people whatever critiques one has of engagement with the evangelical movement, that's not the only thing to say. It's important to also talk about the agency that people have in their own life and ministry to serve God in his world, in his church, whether or not they use the word evangelical, but that they have that opportunity, and that there are possibilities. And part of those possibilities are because of the people that have gone before us. And so it's been a great learning experience to do that. And certainly one of the big things, particularly germane to our conversation, is that a challenge a lot of minority evangelicals have had is being in situations where, when it comes to politics, certain issues are, of course, on the table, other issues not so much. And how do we do a better job of saying, hey, there are other issues besides just the ones that are already on the table, because part of the family says that these are issues. When other members of the family are talking about issues, how do we give validation and attention and effort to those as well? And so I think it's important to see that it is not a new thing for people to have that conversation. It is not a new thing for people to participate in movements and to have a kind of excitement about being involved, while also having disappointments that happen. And then in some cases people migrate, in other cases people keep hanging in with the movements. Like I'm here at Wheaton College. I have not abandoned what I'm doing at Wheaton. Some people, they might be in organizations or institutions or churches where, for them, because of the circumstances, it's better for them to migrate. It's not one or the other. But I want people to see that there is possibility and not just critique. And there's encouragement from those who've gone before us who are willing to say that they were trying to be very sensitive to what the Lord wanted. And so they have tried to live their lives that way. And if we're keeping that in mind, then yes, whatever criticisms or critiques we make, we need to make them, but we also have to be thinking about how we're stepping into the vocation that God still gives to each of us.
Yeah, that's so good. Good. Vince, thanks for being with us. Where can people find you and your work?
www.vincentbacote.com. So you can go there.
You have a very documentary narrator voice.
That's what they tell me. Yeah, but that's my personal website, or you can look up Vincent Bacote, Wheaton College. It'll take you to my faculty page. And again, you can look up the documentary at blackevangelicals.com. Black Evangelicals is all one word.com. You can watch the documentary right there on that page.
Awesome. Well, Vincent, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely fantastic. I appreciate it.